Hello and welcome. I believe we're on episode 10 now of Field Stories. I've lost track, but we're really excited to be here with Dr. Susan Tsang, who is a private consultant through her research consultancy Biodiversitas Global. She also conducts research through her research association affiliations with the American Museum of Natural History and the National Museum of the Philippines. Her consulting work focuses on providing subject matter expertise on addressing illegal wildlife trade, that's very important, and other sustainable development challenges that we face now on a global scale. This includes having to do with program management, monitoring, and also evaluation. And as a researcher, her main interest is the evolution of biogeography of Southeast Asian flying foxes, which are actually bats, right? They're not foxes, with collaborations in conservation and disease ecology. She engages in bat conservation through the community conservation projects to address hunting of flying foxes, and also serves on the steering committee of the Southeast Asian Bat Conservation Research Unit and the Global Union of Bat Diversity Networks to address larger capacity building and assessment policies that are needed. She has done extensive field research in Indonesia and in the Philippines, and has run workshops in other countries in Southeast Asia, such as Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand. And on top of all of that, she's lending her knowledge to us today to discuss more specifically the issue of menstruation in the field. I also want to know about your field experiences, because they sound interesting, and also very plural. But here today to talk about menstruation in the field. And first, I want to thank you for being with us, Dr. Tsang, and welcome you first. But second, I want to ask, how menstruation in the field is actually a barrier. We know it is something that researchers are expected to kind of handle alone privately, but it can be very problematic given many issues, especially access, privacy, and hygiene in fieldwork, can it not?
Yep. So, well, thank you for having me. I actually thought this would be a great way to kind of not talk about bats and the pandemic for a while, which is what I've been mostly talking about for the past 6 months. And these are things that I, as a researcher and as a mentor and as a friend to a lot of people, have noticed that a lot of female students will come to me to ask about, because they know I'm often out in the field for at least a month. So I must have helped to deal with menstruation at some point. And I can kind of walk you through basically my history, because I went from a naive undergrad doing field work in the United States locally to doing all the international research that I do now and leading teams. And this has a lot of cultural differences also in how people deal with them. So those are just some things to remind yourself of. But there is a through line in all this, which is always be willing to ask for help and always be prepared. So I think back in the day when I was an undergrad, like most women who are in the field, I had my period, and at the time I was actually an REU fellow at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And part of the work that we were doing was in these freshwater streams to catch these fish. And so we're in, some deciduous forest, and I'm wearing a scuba suit because we have to float down the river with the seine to catch these particular small minnows. So you have to be in the water, you're in clothes that are very difficult to get off. And so you have to be prepared beforehand. You only have that as your only option. And I had no idea what to do because I had never done that before. I had never done field work in a situation where, I would have to be immersed in water, which is not great for having periods in. And I had not really thought about what I would do. And since I was living away from home, because it was during a summer fellowship, I didn't always have everything with me. And so I had to figure out some solution pretty last minute, because I only found out we were going to the field about a week before. And so I didn't really have a really good solution. And so I did actually had to take a pad, and I was just you know what? Most of this is going to be us walking in a forest, which is the problem. I'm going to deal with it. And then if the water gets close enough to me that I am probably going to have to walk past it, and then it's going to soak into the pad, then I'm just going to stop. And my team that I was with was actually okay with that, because they thought that I was afraid that I was too short. And a lot of these rivers are very dark and murky, and we were trying to catch these eels also and these fish. And so they said, you know what? If you want to float down it and only do that part, that's fine. But if you have a problem, because we have to walk in some of the waters from these little vernal lakes that are made by dams, then yeah, you might be too short, because these are legitimately extremely deep in some spots. So they were okay with them. They didn't really ask about it. But I think at one point I kind of forgot that I was menstruating, and I like walked right into the water and I was like, oh shit. And then I could feel the water get absorbed into the pad. I was like, son of a bitch. And so we had to go, and when we left, I told my mentor at the time, like, I really need to stop at a bathroom, and he just thought I had to go because we were out all day, and I didn't really say anything very much because it's just kind of uncomfortable, and you don't really know what to do when you're like, how old was I then? I was like 20, I think. So I was like pretty young, and it was like the first time I was doing this kind of stuff. And there was only one other woman on the team, and I only knew her like barely, so I didn't really feel comfortable asking her at the time. So, I really didn't have anybody to rely on for that. And I learned my lesson by that point, because the next time I went to the field was in grad school. And so that would be my the summer of the second year of grad school. And that is my first international research trip. And I went to Indonesia with my advisor. And he had given us a list that was stuff that you need to prepare to be in the field, especially in these really remote places. And it was all things like having the right kind of LED lamp. And he suggested a model that would help with, being in a tent versus being outside. It was having stuff like, these are the kinds of Ziploc bags that are the most useful because they are your friend for whatever you're out there, not just for menstruation. And that I took to heart. But then he didn't say anything about menstruating. And we knew we were going to be out for a month in Indonesia and then several weeks in the Philippines right after that. So it was a 2-month-long expedition, basically. And I didn't really know who to ask, but then by that point, like, I had gotten a little bit more savvy about figuring things out myself. And since he had mentioned that Ziploc bags are really important, I just brought more Ziploc bags because truly they are your friend when you are doing research overseas for everything. I actually had a problem where a lot of my sweaty underwear was attracting ants. Like, normally I would just roll them up and then put them in a plastic bag somewhere, and then I would wash them once we get back to somewhere with water. But when I was holding them, I actually saw ants climbing into my bag, and they would like swarm them. And I asked one of my male colleagues, one of my friends in Indonesia, does this happen to your stuff? He's like, no. And he's like, wait, what happened to your stuff? And I explained this to him. He's like, I think your sweat must smell different or something. Because like, I don't know why, but they were only attracted to my underwear. And so I was like, okay, this is really bad. So like, I have to have another Ziploc bag to put all those things in. And I don't know anybody else that has happened to, but I haven't asked a lot of women about that specifically. But there is clearly a difference in how the insects were responding to my sweat also. And so by that point, I was kind of like, okay, well, I am at least kind of prepared this time, where I brought a bunch of tampons with me. And, we always follow the rule of don't leave any garbage behind. And so the Ziploc bags I actually brought from America, they were very thick. And so they're very useful as like garbage bags that I could like zip up and then bring back to either a city or hold until we could have like a fire and burn everything. But when we burn the fire, if you burn like a Ziploc bag from the US, they're so thick that it takes really long to burn through. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense to be burning through something that you could be reusing as a trash bag. So I actually bought cheaper Ziploc bags in Indonesia, where it's really thin. And if you actually have fire and heat under it, it will catch a lot easier. And also if you doused it a little bit with ethanol, it'll catch a lot easier. And we had to do that several times just because it rains a lot where we are. It's very humid. And so you're not always going to find dry leaves to start a fire. And you're not always going to find like a dumpster to throw something away in. So we had to really know our field sites really well. And then now I don't even bring tampons because in between the time of that first grad school experience until when I graduated, I got an IUD. And the IUD actually made me have no periods. Like, it was like spotting the first couple months, and then after that, it's just like nothing. Like, maybe I get one per year sometimes if I'm feeling like really stressed, but for the most part, like, I have nothing. So like, now I go to the field, I just like don't care. I just do whatever. And I bring some panty liners just in case there is that spotting if something happens, but they're extremely unnecessary now for me. I always tell my friends, my female friends, when they go, to bring their own stuff because of the fact that you might not have what you're most comfortable with in the country that you're going to. So for instance, in Indonesia, you can't buy tampons like anywhere almost. You can only buy them, I think, in Bali. and that's
Oh,
it.
really? I didn't know that. Is it that individuals don't use tampons there as high as a normatively, or?
So it's not normative to use it because a lot of people are Muslim and they consider that penetration, was what my students told me. And so I said, oh, okay, I get it. And so that's why they don't use them. But even when you go to Bali, you can only get the ones that are paper applicators. And those are really difficult to use actually when you're in the field. If you are out in the, brush and you have a paper one and you like just peed off, so you're like really dry, it's actually harder to push in also. So I actually prefer the plastic ones, and I have the smaller plastic ones and I just carry it with me. I don't use as many tampons, so I use the ones that absorb more because I know I don't have access to a bathroom very often. So I will just purposely bring like one of the super absorbent ones, and I end up having to wear it for like the 6 hours before I can get somewhere else where you can even
Yeah.
like squat
Yeah,
somewhere.
that's what I was thinking, because we know like toxic shock syndrome is a thing, right? You
Yeah,
can't have you have to change tampons
you
quite
have to change
regularly.
it. Yeah.
And what do you do if you're in a river and you don't have necessarily that access? So yeah, this is um important thing to think about. I actually, this is really bizarre, but I was reading, the old writings of early. I was reading something about being on ships and such, and it was marine engineers, and they were saying we don't have women on board because their blood will attract sharks. And I thought it was seemed like a silly, ridiculous thing, but
Yep.
I'm now wondering, because you made that comment. I will say that I have blood that with mosquitoes, they will always land on me and no one else, and I'll be like, "It's these mosquitoes," and they're like,
Yep.
"I didn't notice them." So it is real that insects attract to
Yep.
others. But actually, how much is pheromones or hormones or scents or these things in the wilderness? I mean, you work with wildlife. Is that like a fair concern about blood and bleeding, or is that sort of a myth?
So I think that there are dietary things that change how we like taste to insects, and that does impact how the insect might perceive you. But also, it has to do with what is the most common blood type in that area. So there might be different reactions. Like in Asia, in East Asia, my blood type is actually the most common. So like they can eat all of the B positives they want there. I'm not that interesting, but like I eat meat versus some of my students who are just vegetarian. So I might be more interesting and smell better to them because of that. I know that in places that I've been to, I am actually more worried about blood in the water only if we know there's like a big saltwater crocodile in there that we're trying to avoid. And that's not just from like a blood and pheromone perspective. It's just like a general safety thing. There's usually a
I
large
don't warn
reptile.
you. I don't warn you. That's quite a
Yeah.
concern.
Yeah, so there's generally actually a large reptile almost everywhere that I work because that's the place that people don't want to go into, and the flying foxes will have giant colonies there because it's safe. And if it's not a giant crocodile, it's something like quicksand is actually around that area, so you wouldn't walk into that anyway. So we've had concerns about that where we will try to avoid walking in areas where you might be attracting like a predator that you don't want to attract. And generally, I haven't actually found that to be an issue. Predators seem to be more attracted to when we finish eating lunch and we have like leftovers, even bony fish leftovers. We bury it in the sand and we bury like the minimal amounts of like leftover rice or leftover vegetables that we have in the sand. And when we're leaving, we will sometimes see the predators like come out and they smell the food and they'll like dig it and they'll eat it. And on one occasion in Flores, we were actually eating lunch and we knew that there were these 9 Komodo dragons on this one particular mangrove island we were on. And we heard this like rustling from behind us. And suddenly like a head popped out of the long grass, like right behind us. And the 5 of us sitting there all yelled Komodo, and we all pointed at it. And because they're not the ones that are from the national park that are acclimated to people, this one was actually afraid of us. And so when we all yelled so loudly, it freaked out and it just ran away. So I think for us it was like a food issue actually more than the blood issue. But if you do have garbage that has blood in it, you do not want to put that anywhere near your food or where you are sleeping, because there might be other things that are attracted to it. In my particular case, also that I actually worry about leeches more than anything, because land leeches are very common in Southeast Asia. And when, this is also the other benefit of not bleeding ever again. I remember on at least 2 occasions where I saw leeches like somewhere near me, and it was the only place I could find with like cover to pee. And so I was like trying to pee as quickly as possible because I could tell that like I probably smelled like blood, and the leeches were like inching towards you. You know, they're very small, but you can see them coming at you from like the little leaf bit that you're near. And I've run into leeches if I'm not careful. There's a leech that might have gotten onto a spider web, and so it's just hanging somewhere where I can't see it very well until it like is on me. And so I brought a colleague once who was a government employee from the US, and this is his first time in Southeast Asia. Like, he usually worked in Africa, so leeches were not a problem where he worked. And he was taking photos of something, and we were out at night, so it was very dark. He accidentally walked into a spider web, and a leech landed right next to his eye. And I had to grab him. I couldn't even say anything. I was like, don't move. And I grabbed him at the same time. And I was trying to like brush the leech off him just because it was so close to his eye that I was afraid that it would get right into it. And once it gets into it, it's really difficult to get out. I didn't have the forceps with me like right then and there. We'd have to go back to the campsite. And so I was like, no, just like brush it off. And so for women who are menstruating, I've heard stories from some of my Malaysian friends that said that they've also seen leeches kind of coming after them a little bit. I have not had a problem with sharks necessarily, even though I am in an area where it is just the Pacific Ocean. Like, there's no continental shelf for a lot of these islands in Indonesia and in the Philippines. And that might often have to do with the fact that the environments that we're in are coral reefs that tend to be either blasted out in some cases if they're very close to the shore, because the fishermen do blast fishing, which is illegal and also kills the entire reef. And we wouldn't be in deeper water in some cases where you might see more of them. There's a lot of human activity near shore in Indonesia. And so there tends to actually not be a ton of these larger predators, but unless somebody brought it in because they hunted it. So yeah.
I love how cavalierly you just went over the quicksand part. Like,
Oh
oh yeah,
yeah.
there's also quicksand. I was like,
Well, the funniest thing was that my student, when she first told me that it was quicksand, she was like, "Oh yeah, we can't walk on that part because it's quicksand." And I was like, "Wait, did you say quicksand?" Like, and I had to check. Like, do you mean like quicksand, or is that just like a mistranslation of something in Indonesian to English? And she was like, "No, like in Indiana Jones sinking quicksand." And I was like, "Okay, so we were talking about the same quicksand." And I just wanted to take a look just to see how it looked like. And so we like peeked into that particular part of the mangrove, and you can tell it was definitely quicksand because it looks very different from the rest of the mangrove that was around it. And so we had to double back the other way. But you have to be careful for that. But also for us in working in these really dense environments in mangroves, we also have a lot of snakes. And, in Southeast Asia, some of the most venomous snakes are native to there. And there have been occasions where if you're not careful, you will have almost stepped on one that's just like coiled underneath a branch of a mangrove tree that just is coming up. Like, you just don't see it because you're not really looking under there. So you have to be really careful in choosing where you want to squat and pee, especially if you are menstruating, because it might take you a little bit longer. It might just be like there are leeches near there. And if you stepped in the wrong way and you're peeing on a snake, it's probably going to try to come after you. The snakes that I've encountered include things that with the common way that they refer to them, they're death adders. And so they're like really venomous. And there's been a lot of sea snakes also in the Philippines that we've had to deal with.
Dr. Tsang, no. Further this conversation goes, I'm just like, as someone who does ethnographic field work, I'm like, I saw a spider once, but like,
oh no. I think there's some level of like, oh yeah, that's really cool wildlife that we're seeing, and we were all just like really impressed with seeing it more than anything else. So I took a picture of a snake that I almost stepped on once because it looked emaciated, and otherwise I would just like keep walking because it's just like a regular snake to me. So that's how used to it I am. But you do have to be really careful. Like I cannot stress this point like enough, because there's so many people that don't realize that there are snakes under things and then they step on it and they can get hurt. And also there are a lot of like bee and wasp nests that might be over you that hang lower because the tree branches are actually lower. So you got to be careful about that too when you set up camp even. So there are just precautions that you should take and be observant like prior to setting up camp, prior to setting up these spaces that you use. And when we are in a site that, it's basically a catching site where we set up a temporary camp and we set up the nets where we have to move away from it at least like 20 minutes walking and wait. Like during the waiting time, you might be doing things like, I have to go to the bathroom, I have to go do this, this, and this. And if you're going to the bathroom, it's gonna be really, really dark. And so you would have to suss out where the peeing spot is before it becomes dark. And everybody in in the team should know that that's the peeing area. So it doesn't really matter how much cover there is there, because there will be somebody peeing probably. And it's okay for you to then take your time if you need to. And if you end up having to poop, then you can just take the sand and just bury it. You know, it's easy. And usually for us, because we don't have access to fresh water all the time, we bring bottles of water. And so I have a reusable bottled water for the one that I drink from, but I have like a plastic, like disposable one for when we just bring it to use in the bathroom. And that's just for sanitary reasons, so I can throw it away later on. And I know my students do the same thing sometimes. I know that if you don't have water, we've just kind of been like, all right, so, you know, we'll just bring like some really light tissue and try to wipe with it. And sometimes you just don't have any choice. And you're just like, I'm just going to have to just be, you know, taking this leaf over here that I know what this plant is, and it's not going to give me a rash. And so learn your plants.
Please learn your plants. If you're in
Learn your
that, you don't want
plants.
to get some, yeah,
Yeah.
how
Like,
is it, poison oak or something like this?
it's not even just that. There might be like bacteria on certain plants that have, you know, they have mutualisms, and that might be worse for you as a human in terms of health. There might be other things involved that you just don't want to have your hands on. And there are actually some plants that are like medicinal, where if it breaks, the inside part might sting you more because it might be like slightly chemical in some way. And so you don't want to touch any of that when you're like peeing and trying to wipe yourself, you know. So I feel like learning basics about plants is really important.
Yeah, but you've actually brought another thing to my mind, which is very important for fieldwork, which is being aware of the nature, even if you're not doing work in nature, and you're
Mm-hmm.
clearly very, very well versed in things, and you know, this is your domain. But even just for myself, I mean, I'm a lover of nature, and I'm interested, and I love animals and things, but I don't have
Right.
an in-depth knowledge about local ecologies. And going out into the forest and encountering, this is in northern Greece under Albania, wild
Oh
boar pack,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, I didn't know, you know, oh gosh, there's these pigs and stuff, and they actually
Mm-hmm.
killed a woman. The locals told me, be
Yep.
careful, they're not friendly at all, they will kill you. And imagine, you know, luckily they just decided to let me be. They kind of
Oh
stared at
yeah.
me for a while, and then the head one was like, ah, we'll forget you. But it was one of those moments where that encounter, I had never even crossed my mind that there
Oh
would be
god,
some
yeah.
wildlife in this local grove region. And so that, like, it's like, oh, I would do that at home in California. So here I find myself just
Yep.
transplanting what I would do into different contexts, which
Yeah.
isn't bad. We want to
Yeah.
know what is
Yep.
around. We want to know what kind of things
Yep.
want that knowledge, or what kind of plants there are. So that's a really good point. But also you mentioned this idea of utilizing, for example, IUD, Implanon, we know is a good one. All kinds of things, not of
Yep.
course for family planning, but also for
Yep.
menstruation. There's all, I think there's the cup is something that people
Yeah,
started
so
using.
the Diva cups were very popular, especially for people that do field work like in the US, because you can just wash it. And a lot of people I know have two, and they can just switch them sometimes. But because we don't have access to clean water, it's not a really good option for us in Southeast Asia, especially in places I go to that are extremely remote. There have been sites where we go out to this outpost kind of base camp, and we know that we only have a certain amount of fresh water for a certain amount of days. And regardless of how much we finish or not, we have to go back after that because we just don't have access to fresh water. And like the year after, when they told us that, oh, they actually built a new pipe that brings fresh water there, we were like, oh, this would have made our lives so much easier like last year. So we ended up staying in those places longer, but we didn't have a choice sometimes in where we go, right? Because that's where the wildlife is, that's where your research is. And you need to be prepared to, you know, stay with your group in a way where you have enough water for everybody to drink, but also just enough for you for like certain hygienic issues if you are menstruating. And I think it's just useful to have wet wipes all the time because of that. Like I know that it's something that my advisor had always reminded me to bring. And it's not just because of menstruation. It's also because like there are people that get diarrhea and they need to wipe themselves. There are a lot of people that, for me, it's like when I do a necropsy, I want to wipe my hands with alcohol or something else that disinfects it afterwards. Even though I don't eat with my hands, a lot of Indonesians do eat with their hands. So I also remind them to, you know, use at least the ethanol wipes, or at least like put some of the ethanol in like the gels and stuff and like, you know, disinfect their hands. So I actually do remind other people also of that, because we are in environments where I might have touched a surface after doing a necropsy and it has blood from a wild animal, and they might have touched it too and gotten on them and didn't realize, and then they put their hand into their mouth when they eat. So I just try to remind people that, you know, we are in a space where I do work with mammals. I do work with mammals that are being opened up, and it's not just like we're releasing them. Most of them we release, it's not a problem, but sometimes when we don't, I just have to tell people like, please stay out of this space, just because it's also a contamination issue. We are extremely careful when we go out with students also, because, well, at least I am, because I don't want them to feel unsafe whenever we go out somewhere. And that's not just in like harassment issues or anything else, but also just, you know, day-to-day stuff. Sometimes people don't really vocalize if they feel uncomfortable. And so I often like scout out ahead to make sure these are sites that they can use, or I will like tell them, you know, to tell me if they feel that they're uncomfortable with something. So often when we're out somewhere, middle of a mangrove or middle of a site, either myself and another student of mine who might be from that site that knows it really well, we'll go together and we'll leave the rest of the team like on the boat. And we'll say like, okay, we'll be back in like an hour. We're gonna do recon with the ranger, and then we're gonna come back. And then we'll see if it makes sense for everybody to go or not. And the tendency sometimes is that these mangroves are extremely dense and it doesn't make sense for everybody to go, just because it would be disturbing the wildlife more, or it would be just, you know, it's too dense that the person actually behind us can't make it through. So we just decide, okay, well, we were a bunch of small people who were very spry. And so like, we saw the thing we needed to see, we took the notes we needed to take, let's go back and find a different way to go in that will let other people be able to also access it, or is actually conductive to us doing research. So we have to make a lot of those choices in a way that protects the rest of our team. And I remember once we actually went into a mangrove where they had told us there was one really big saltwater crocodile or something like that. And it was on the other side of the mangrove. So we can go to the side where the bat colony was, and it was fine. And so we said, okay, we're going to do the recon first, the two of us with the ranger, and we'll come back in an hour. And so he walked in, and then he got lost. So he kind of told us like, oh, this is the way I usually go in. And he kind of lost track of things. And we ended up doing like a circle, and we were like, oh my God, we're like 45 minutes in and now we're like lost in this really dense mangrove. And these were mangroves that are literally just over the ocean, and they have like no leaves on them. So it's like poking you all the time from these dry sticks. And this guy just went off somewhere, and we said, okay, how about you check out like how far we are from the shore, and let's just go on the outside of the mangrove and walk back. And so we'll end up behind the boat instead of back in front of the boat. And so he said, okay. And so he just left. And me and my student are sitting in the middle of the mangrove, like, what the hell are we doing? Like, this was not a very good plan, because we were just gonna go in here. We know there's a crocodile somewhere in here, and we see the water rising because the tide is coming in, and we're like, we need to get out of here like soon. So that's why we had that 1 hour limit. So we were like, oh, okay, you know, if we hear him scream, then we know don't go that way. But you know, if we hear like splashing and stuff, we know also like
great plan. What a
yeah.
wonderful.
Because like we told him was like, oh, you should take the machete with you, and he was like, no, you guys can keep it, and I'll figure it out. It'll be really fast. And we're like, that doesn't seem like a good idea. But he gave us the machete, so he came back and he said, okay, that way is safe. You know, the crocodile's over there, probably, so it's probably fine. And so we said, okay. So we went out to the outside of the mangrove and we walked back, and we ended up having to take the boat and go around the island to the other side to find a way for the boat to go in, because there's no way you can walk anywhere in the mangrove on the other side. It's just water and a bunch of mangrove roots coming in. And there were logs that had fallen in those places also, where there were storms that had come in previously, and it knocked down a lot of the larger trees that were older. So there are these logs floating in there. And I remember thinking, oh, the water here is really still, because one of those logs stopped the influx of ocean water and made the water so still that it looked like there was like a sheet over it. And it was really dark water too, because this is a mangrove, has a lot of silt in it. And there were a lot of logs that, with the way that the sun was hitting them, you can't actually tell if it's a log or a crocodile sometimes, just because it's really far.
Please say it's not a crocodile.
No, so we were worried about that, and we were looking at it like, okay, we're gonna go in like a little bit and then check what we need to check, and if we can't go in that far, then we just turn around. So we went in and we were rowing really slowly just to be like extra careful. And we were going so slow that, you know, we were thinking like we could probably like stick our hands in and even help like row, because that's how slow we were going. And we waited for the guy, you know, slowly bring us in, and we said, oh, we should turn here, because if we don't, the mangrove actually curves in a way where we might hit that log over there. And that log happened to be under the shade of a tree where you can't actually tell if it was a log or a crocodile, because only half of it was peeking out. And the guy who was rowing, we were speaking to him in Bahasa, so it's not like a language issue. He rowed and he rowed the wrong way. And we went towards the log instead. And all of us are freaking out in the boat, like, oh my God, no, don't go towards it. And he actually gets so close that before we can even say anything to turn around, or we were trying to turn him around or at least straighten him out, he had already hit this log. And so we all were like, oh my God, if that was a crocodile, we'd all be so screwed right now. And like, we would just be in the water with probably that one and probably other ones that we don't know about. So we were just like, okay, like we have to turn around now, because like that freaked us out, and that was not a crocodile. So we pushed the boat back, turned around, and the moment we turned around and turned the motor on to start to try to get out of there, because we were in pretty deep, the sky just opens up and just a giant torrential rainstorm comes down. And I am sitting there on the boat, like with my backpack on me, and you can't turn around because the boat is very skinny. I had to get my Indonesian student to open my backpack and pull out my poncho and throw it over me and her, because she couldn't reach her backpack to get her stuff. And the two of us were using my poncho, and the entire way out, she was just like a head over my shoulder. And she's like, I can't see anything. It's just completely pitch black here because your poncho is also black, and your head is in the way. And yeah, we're just gonna be a two-headed monster until we get out of this rain, huh? It was like 20 minutes of that, where we were just talking to each other in my poncho with all we were trying to go out. And we got completely soaked because we couldn't get our stuff in time. And so our legs were completely soaked at least. And I remember saying to her, I was like, aren't you like menstruating or something also? And she said, yeah, when we get back to the house, I need to like change. And she didn't have any other pair of pants. And so she just had to borrow some from the lady who lives there while she was waiting for her pants to dry. So
this is like a classic tampon commercial. Like, she's doing her work and she's a mom and she's at an office, but instead she's in a mangrove forest.
yeah,
There's a crocodile.
yeah. Yeah,
Going through.
I'm really glad that people that we've met in the field have always been really hospitable. And it's like part of the culture there is that people are very welcoming. So you can like randomly show up in a village that you need to do research in, and you will meet the elder, meet the person who is the head of the village, and then you'll tell them what you're there to do. And you might even ask him like, okay, can we stay at your house? Or like, is there somebody who owns a big house that will probably let us stay there? And they usually help us out. Like we can stay with them, or he'll tell us like, oh, there's like a person who owns like a little inn and you can stay with them. And because we're usually a pretty small group, I don't have teams that are bigger than 7, I think is the largest team I've had, just because of the way that the remote field works out. But because of that, people are usually pretty willing to have us. They like hearing about the wildlife. They like learning about what's going on around them. And my Indonesian student and my partners that are on the ground are very like personable. And so that helps with just making it a little bit easier. And so if they went into a house and they really needed to use the bathroom because they needed to change a pad or change a tampon, then they can just go to the lady of the house and be like, oh, can I use your bathroom? And it's not like weird. Because it's just like they're comfortable with us now. And the tendency in a lot of these places, it's not just the hole in the ground kind of situation, but it's also like in a house, it's a water closet, so it has the big like tile tub of water, and then you scoop from that in order to flush the toilet or to
It's
bathe.
like a Turkish toilet, yeah?
Yeah, it's literally like a water closet. Like I grew up with one in Hong Kong, so I'm used to it. And then when I lived in Indonesia, my bathroom in my apartment was also like that. So you don't have like trash cans usually in those places because the water's just floating around. And maybe if somebody has a trash can, it's those really small ones. So you don't really want to put your garbage from your tampons or your pads into it, because usually it is so small that you could probably fit only one pad, or you will put the tampon in and it's just like the blood would just get everywhere on the bottom because there's no bag or anything, right? And you don't want to like leave that for somebody who's letting you stay at their house and like have lunch with them and have it be something that they have to worry about that they don't even know what that is because they've never seen it. So
this happened to me. In Greek, they call them, let's see, in Greek it's called white mice because the tail of the tampons are white, and they say like no white mice, and that's kind of a very polite way to say please don't flush hygienic things, whatever.
Right.
But it is the first time when I was in Turkey, and have to go to the bathroom or have to pee really bad, and they said, here's the toilet, and I was like, no, the bathroom, and they were like, that's that, and I was like, no, the toilet, and they were like, that's the bathroom, and I had never seen a Turkish toilet. Like, I didn't know a water closet. Then
Oh,
I realized, oh, WC, that's where it comes from, but I didn't know. And it's like so many things that we take for granted, you know? It's
yep,
in this case, it sounds like people are quite open and you can have these conversations. But what about in general, culturally? Menstruation has different contexts.
yep,
Some places it's absolutely taboo to talk about. Others,
yep,
it might be seen as a polluting, or there's all
yep.
kinds of different contexts. So it sounds like this is a conversation that can be had with larger,
Yeah.
even though it's hard to access things. Or what's the
So,
yes.
so usually I find like with women to women, they are okay with talking about it because in Indonesia, once you get to know somebody, or even if you kind of know them like well enough, if you're the same gender, you can get really close really quickly, actually. So for me, I actually am in a supermarket, and one time one of my students just asked me about menstruation there because she was buying pads, and then she knew I was living in Indonesia and that I didn't use them, and so she asked me what I used, and I had to explain the tampons to her because of that. So that they're not like as familiar with it. But like if you went to Bali, the religion, the major religion for the group there is Hindu. And so if you wanted to go into a temple, you're not allowed to if you're menstruating because it's considered that you're unclean. And so when we were in Bali doing research, the second half of that trip, I was menstruating, and my collaborator, who is a man, the two of us were there, and we were like, oh, while we're here, let's just like stop at some of the temples to see. But also we found out there was a temple that had a cave behind it that had a bunch of bats in there. And so we just wanted to check what the species were. And I was not allowed to go in. And so I had to give him all the equipment, and we had to get somebody else to go with him because you need at least 2 sets of hands to do stuff. And I had to just sit on the beach and wait. I sat on the beach for 4 hours and waited. And I was like, man, I've never done like no work before when we're in the field. Because usually, regardless of what situation we're in, I've been healthy enough and able enough to do the work. But this was like a religious taboo kind of thing. So I was like, well, we want to respect them. So I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to wait. And I ended up like talking to one of the head priests that were there. His English was like kind of broken, and then we just hand signed everything else. And then we found out we both had Facebook, which has like translation, so that solved the problem. So it was good because everybody has it, and it's preferentially given data transfer. So we were just using it in order to talk to each other. So that's something that is a problem. And if you're like a woman and you have to go to a man who is Indonesian, it might be uncomfortable for them because they're not really used to dealing with things from the other gender. And so I would not openly say it to anybody who I don't know very well, but because my collaborator in Indonesia he's very like open-minded, and he's westernized, a little bit. Like he's worked a lot with Westerners, and he's done a lot of collaborations with people for these really long expeditions. And so we actually get along really, really well. And so he's kind of like my work husband almost. Like, we always hang out together, and like we always make sure we talk to each other about things. And if I had a problem, not just about menstruation, but about something else, like I was feeling like anemic once, and like I could just tell him, and then we can go and solve the problem. And so this is what I mean by like, if you need help, you really should just tell somebody, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're not prepared to be in the field, or that you're become in a condition where you can't continue. And for us, the anemia one was actually related once to a period that I suddenly had that I miscalculated. And so I didn't expect to have it then. And so we didn't bring enough food for me that would replace the iron I was bleeding out. And so we had this woman who was at, like, I guess it was like the house that we were staying in. She was like a cook for this field house. And I was supposed to go with the guys to go check on the bats and go catch them, but I couldn't because I was feeling super weak from losing all this blood and not replenishing enough nutrients. And I was like lying. I was lying in some like gazebo-esque thing by the beach, and I just couldn't move. And I was just like, oh my God, I feel like I'm dying. And it's the only time I've ever felt that bad in the field, because I was just so like drained. And she looked at me and she asked me, she doesn't speak English, and at that point I didn't speak Bahasa either. And she asked me about what I was feeling, like what I was sick from. And I kind of understood some words about like sick and stomach, and then she figured out that I was anemic because I was menstruating. And so she actually went out to this tree that has leaves that are kind of like spinach when you make it in a soup, and she made me spinach soup basically, and just gave it to me to drink for lunch and for dinner. and it just like helped me replenish my nutrients. And later on, she asked Sigit about it because, you know, she wanted to talk to somebody who knew English also and to like translate between us. And he was like, oh yeah, that's why she's sick. And he explained the situation to her. And he's like, yeah, she's probably gonna need you to make more food to like help replenish her strength. Like she's okay from the bathroom side, she's figured that out, but like in terms of food, we need something to help replenish those nutrients. And so we are very open with each other, and that helps a lot with making sure that I have my needs and making sure that we're very successful in our expedition. And that really is something that I value a lot for my students also when I go out with them and my collaborators, just to make sure everybody is safe. So it's like all these different aspects in the field that you want to be prepared for like any situation, right? So I always have a first aid kit. And I always tell people, if you are the field leader, you should have taken a CPR course and you should have taken a first aid course. And you can get access to those at like the Y, for instance. When I was in New York, the Y offered them like at least once a week, and you can get certified. But you have to do the course at least once a year or once every 2 years, I think, to replenish that license. So I do encourage people to do that, because then at least you have the skills to save somebody if you need to. And sometimes those techniques do change a little bit over time. So you do actually want to be updated, not think that you are prepared just because you took the course like 10 years ago. And right now, obviously, it'd be kind of difficult to get those courses, but when things are open again completely, I do encourage people to go out to do that, because it's usually free at places like the Y. It's just a matter of time.
That's a wonderful suggestion, but I think especially for people that do the kind of work you do, it does sound very high risk. But you also really bring to this conversation this idea that, you know, it's not, menstruation isn't just blood and bleeding, it's also cramp. Like some women have like extreme cramping, or some women have, some women are debilitated, they need to lay in bed, or they need, they lose the iron. I mean, there's a lot of plural experiences about menstruation for any individual who menstruates. And so that lack of awareness that some people might have, that, oh, maybe they're being lazy for a week, or maybe they're not carrying their weight, or what do you mean you need to rest? This is really quite damaging, and it is kind of, it's a barrier for individuals who, it's not like, I don't feel like, I don't actually know, but if you've ever been in this situation, but this feeling like they have to overcome it and still do the work, even though they're utterly miserable, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that pressure. And I think that because my advisor has always trusted me that I will get what needs to be done, like he's kind of not micromanage me. And so my relationship with my collaborator is very personal. And so we can then build upon that, and then, you know, make sure that I'm comfortable. Like, we met each other under professional circumstances, but, you know, after working in the field together under those types of circumstances and situations, like, you just become close friends. You know, it just happens, right? Because then your personal life is an open book to each other. Is you need to have it be an open book to each other, because it might be unsafe in some of the situations that we're in. And so we are extremely honest about what is going on with ourselves because of that. And actually, now that you mentioned the pain relief, I remember one more thing. So I'm allergic to ibuprofen. And so I always make sure that I have to bring acetaminophen with me, like Tylenol, because if you go to Southeast Asia, a lot of places don't have acetaminophen at the drugstore. They have drugs that only have ibuprofen. And I can only take up to a certain dosage before my entire face breaks out in a rash. And if I take too much of it, or if it's injected, then my throat closes up and I will die. So it will be like a really big issue, obviously, if that happened. And so I always bring painkillers that I know I can take. And we once actually tried to ask people if they had acetaminophen. And we asked it based on the brands that we knew that were local that might have it. Because if you ask for acetaminophen, they don't know what it is. So you have to ask for like the brand locally that uses that as the active ingredient instead. And when we were doing this, there was one time in Bali, we did not have enough medication for me. Like I ran out basically on like the third day, and it was like really bad, which I'd eaten all of them already. And I remember we had to go to a store, and none of them had acetaminophen like anywhere. And like Panadol is the one that you would get in Southeast Asia. So we ended up having to buy the ibuprofen, and I took the tablet and I broke it in half, and we bought like the low dosage one already. And I just had to take it because we were in the car even, and I was like in a double over in pain. And like, it was just not a good idea. So like, I just tried to find something to at least make it be a little bit better. And so I just had to take a really, really low dose and hope that my rash doesn't break out. About 3 hours later, my rash broke out anyway. And so we were in the middle of doing a necropsy. and I could feel it like starting to happen on my face. And my collaborator was like, "Are you okay? Because you're tearing right now." And I was like, "Oh shit, I feel this rash coming. It's like in my right eye. I feel the watering, and I feel it coming on." And so he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna finish this, and you need to wash your hands and like drink some water, lie down or something, like wash your face. I'll finish it." And so we just split up a little bit on the work. And so I took a break. I cleaned myself up, and then I cleaned my face up a little bit more, and I just lied down for a little bit to let it pass, drink some more water. And he finished the workup, and about an hour later, I felt better, and the rash had subsided. And so I got back up, and I was like, "Okay, I'm good now. So like we can continue, and you don't have to do all the work." So it was just recognizing that sometimes even in the middle of doing something, you have to stop, and you have to recognize that you need that break, because you're not going to be able to do the best work anyway if you are extremely like itchy, or if you're like your eye is closing up because of a giant swollen part over your head. Like, just recognize that it means you need to stop. It's okay to stop.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like, so I know the issue with menstruation has not been part of the training or conversations because I don't know, we've been on this earth for 300,000 years and yet we're so awkward about menstruation. But like, these questions are like hushed, or I don't want to say taboo necessarily, but we don't talk about them as far as even
Yeah.
field sites. They're just not something that is part of training, or it's like, hey, also if you're on your period, XYZ. But also conversations that yes, it's okay to take breaks. What, as far as, it sounds like a lot of these you had to learn on your own, so I'm wondering about training. Like, where do you envision as far as best practices for having conversations about menstruation or about safety or about all these lessons that you kind of were hard won, almost dying with a crocodile, but how this should be part of a conversation that we have beforehand, right? Or how do we approach that?
Yeah, so I think for one thing, whenever you are going to do field work, right now it's not required that you take a CPR and first aid course, which you really should have as a requirement for anyone doing field work. When I was going out, prior to going, my advisor told me to buy travel insurance. So if something really, really bad happens to you and you need to be medevaced or something else like that, where you need, some sort of medical attention, the travel insurance will cover some of that for you, because there are certain types that you can get that's for traveling to these really remote places. For me, as a bat biologist, I have a lot of vaccines that I have to get before I go to the field. So I plan that ahead of time. I make sure I know how many weeks I would need, because some of them are multiple dosage ones, especially the rabies one. Like the first time I got the rabies one, you need to have like one shot and then take a week break, and then the second shot, and then take like 2 weeks, and then the third shot. So it's something that needs time. You can't do it last minute. And if you started doing it last minute and then you only get your second or your third dose when you're already in country, because that was your only option because you did it too late, then like try to at least get it in those countries, because it's okay if you're elsewhere. Just don't touch any bats in a way where you might get, bitten or something, or like feral dogs that are around that probably also have rabies. Like, just don't be near them and don't touch them, where you might expose yourself to it. For a lot of that, a lot of the medication that you need for like Malarone, like from antimalarials, are usually covered by your insurance if you're at a university. So you can buy that, I think at $30 usually when I was in New York, but it might vary a little bit everywhere else. I think if you buy the more like pricey brands, they're about like $90, and then the cheaper over-the-counter one was like $30. And so there's a price range. And there's two different kinds of antimalarials. So there might be some antimalarials that don't work in the country that you're going to, because there were enough people that took it where now the malarial strain is resistant to that particular medication. So that's true in the Philippines, for instance, because they sold one of the really common types of antimalarials as an over-the-counter thing almost at one of their drugstores. And then the army also has been given it to take, and people never finish their courses properly. And so it's basically useless for dealing with like actual malaria if you're in a rainforest and you're probably going to get exposed to it. So we always have to take this other kind, which costs a little bit more money. But you have to know those things about where you go. And if you go to a travel clinic, they will usually tell you these things. Like, I went to a travel clinic where it only does travel stuff. So they give you a whole talk about where you're going, and then they tell you all these things about what you're probably going to encounter and about the vaccination process. And then they usually prepare like a little dossier for you about the countries you're going to, so you can read up on it more and whatever diseases that are going there. And that's great in a big city like New York, where you can get that. because every need is catered to in a giant city. But if you're in a smaller space, university or somewhere else where you don't have access to that, you can go to the internet, and I think on CDC and on WHO's site they actually talked about each of these infectious diseases, and it'll tell you like which countries they're in and which countries require that you have vaccinations, or under what situations you need to have those vaccinations. So I do encourage people to check that out before they travel and just be prepared. And all of this goes back to the fact that you probably need to have health insurance, right? And for a lot of people, that is a problem in the United States. In some cases, if you have to buy like monthly health insurance, it might be the cheapest kind, and you might not get coverage for all of these things. And so you must buy like travel insurance, in my opinion, when you go, just so you cover all your bases. And spending the money on that, I think, is worthwhile for the medical stuff. Not just like if you lost your luggage or if your plane got delayed or canceled. Like for your health, there are certain things that you can get and certain types of travel insurance you can get that will address that specifically. And you need to look at your own travel agenda and what you might be exposed to decide what's the right one for you. And that also, that your health insurance overall will determine if you might have easier access to some contraceptive methods, for instance, right? So like even birth control pills and IUDs, like they varied between states, and it was only after Obamacare was passed that it was free basically where I was, right? So prior to Obamacare, I asked my gynecologist about how much it cost, and I think she told me it was like $50 to $100 depending on which kind I get. And this was like very, very early. So IUDs are extremely new to the market, and people really didn't know how available it should be and how many people would take it. And after Obamacare became a thing, when I actually had the time to go and get one, it was free. So I just went to my doctor and I told her like, I want to get one. And she said, okay. And I came back like 3 weeks later after they ordered one. I have the hormonal kind, Mirena. And so she just inserts it. And when everything you read on the internet tells you that you will feel some stinging pain. And so, you might feel like a little bit of pain for the rest of the day. So you shouldn't plan anything else. It is excruciating. It is not like a little pain. It is to the point where I normally took the bus to the doctor and instead I had to call a car to bring me back home, even though it was like a 10-minute car ride and it's like a 15-minute bus ride, because I could not move. Like it was so painful in my abdomen. And I actually had to call one of my friends once to come and pick me up because I didn't trust myself to get into the car properly and like call the car and everything. So like she had to come get me. So I think you need a plan whenever you're going to do stuff like that. And just,
I've heard of that. I heard that they're like, you're not fooling anyone. Like it's very painful. I don't know why they have this thing where they're like, it's only a small prick. I seen a meme where they were like, it's no bigger. It was about this specifically, and they were like, it's just a small device, no bigger than a tampon, and it was like a giant, like huge rifle. And it was like this kind of. I think they think that they're putting people at ease, but really we want to be realistic about it. And for anyone listening, IUD is an intrauterine device. It obviously protects. It's quite high protection against pregnancy. I think it's in the 90%. It also because it sits in the uterine, the body perceives that you are pregnant, so you don't create a menstrual flow or menstrual lining. And it lasts 7 years. Is that right?
It depends on the kind you get. So like the copper ones last for a different amount of time than the hormonal ones, right? So I had a hormonal one and that lasted, I think 3 or 4 years, something like that. And I think the copper one lasted a little bit longer. So that one might be the one you're thinking of for like the 7 years. And I know a lot of people got the copper one because they were like, oh, I don't want to have more hormones in my body. So like, I want to get this one instead. But I read through all the literature and I decided that for me, I wanted the hormones because when I was previously taking birth control, those hormones were also introduced to me and I wanted to keep that stable. And so I did actually take the Mirena because it was similar enough at a different dosage from the hormones that I was getting from birth control. So I think do your research is really important because there are different kinds and they last for different amounts of time. And that also is important because then you need to figure out where might I be that far in the future, that if I can replace it or if I need to do something else. And I know another colleague of mine who also works on that, she has the one that you implant in your arm. What is it called? Like I forget what it's called.
I think it's Implanon. Is that?
No, it's something that begins with an N, but it's like an arm implant. There's a couple different ones.
Yeah, there's an arm implant.
Yeah.
It sounds like futuristic implant in your arm. Yeah, but it releases the progesterone like on a daily.
Yeah. So it does that, and she also has like a big gap in time before she has to get that replaced, right? So a lot of us who get those are very aware because if you do not, it'll be like 5 years later. So sometimes you just get the date wrong, right? It's 5 years later. They give you a little card, actually. It tells you exactly the date when you got it inserted into you, so you remember, and you can just look at it and say, oh, it's been 5 years since then. I remember that this year I was supposed to get it switched in March, towards the end of March, and that's when the pandemic happened. And I was like, I can't go to the doctor because they're all closed. And so I waited, and I said, okay, I can probably wait a little bit just because I know that the doctors are closed. There's other stuff that they need to be worried about right now. So I can wait a little bit. But by the time I got to May, like 2 months later, I could feel that my hormones were changing a little bit. Like I knew that my hormones weren't as balanced as before, because I had like mood swings, or like I had fatigue and sometimes when I shouldn't have them. And I also started seeing some spotting, which I normally don't have, because I normally don't have a period. And so I was like, okay, I really, really need to go to the doctor. And so I called them, and my gynecologist at that point was only taking in like a handful of people per day because they were trying to limit the number of patients that they had. And it was 3 weeks before I could get an appointment with her. So I saw her in early June, I think, or early or mid-June. And then I could only get the IUD switched in July, because it took a while to order, even though I told them, so it would still take a bit. So it was like a huge lag time. And I could tell that right now, it's more difficult sometimes to get to your regular doctor, even because everyone is so overloaded, and because a lot of the doctors are not taking as many people in right now. Just, it's something that you have to be able to plan for ahead of time. So I do encourage people to make sure that they know that they want one, and then take the time and effort to actually get it if that's the case. If there's a Planned Parenthood near you, they have a lot of information about that too. So you can talk to somebody there, and they can give you like brochures and stuff, and talk to you about it, and talk to you about like where might be the best place near you to go get one. And it's advice. It's not like they're telling you like you have to do this, but it's something that you can consider, and just information that you can have that you might not have access to otherwise, just from like looking on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Planned Parenthood is a wonderful resource, and letting them know, like, I'm going abroad, and what do
Yep.
what are time frames? But there's a lot of planning that's needed. I know for myself, I learned the hard way about something that's called giardia. That happens
Oh,
if you pet stray dogs in the Middle East and in South America. This is something. Don't eat a sandwich after,
you
because
you can get it from drinking fresh water in streams also.
Yeah, that's as well.
So
I think it was dog. There was a lot of stray dogs, and people
yeah.
said don't pet them, but my heart, and so I had to, and playing with them and such, and then we don't know how, but giardia occurred, and we want to know these things before, until you're fallen sick with the illness, and it's not fun afterwards. It's always good to plan and know ahead of time what are issues, because you think, oh, because that's not a problem in my area, or whatever it might be.
And yeah, it's part of what I mean by like you always want to plan ahead. Even as a graduate student, you want to understand what your healthcare package gives you. You want to understand as a professional, after you get out of that and you're paying for your own health insurance, what it gives you that you might no longer have when you were a grad student. And so transitioning even might change your healthcare access drastically, and you need to know what you're losing and what you're gaining, so that you can either pay for something better, or find a replacement, or find some other alternative solution. So I think that being prepared is a large part of why I've never really had any huge issues in the field. But also, like I actually did have to go out and just learn it myself, because I don't know, I think most of the people that advise me very much in the like, throw you into the fire and you'll figure it out. And like, I could deal with it, and not every single student can. So like, I survived that, right? But a lot of people can't. And I'm always excited to go to the field, because I'm very used to being in those types of situations. Like, I'm not from a background where everything is cushy and yada, yada, yada. Like, I'm used to using a single towel to wipe down my entire body and my hair, because I'm from a cheap Asian immigrant family, and where we only had that tiny ass towel to use even when I was a kid. So like, to me, these are normal. And like, I had a water closet when I was a kid also, so I knew what to do. Like, all these things I've actually been exposed to, because I was from somewhere else, and we were not like middle class. So like, you have to deal with those situations anyway. And so when I was here, I noticed usually that the students who are least prepared to deal with those situations, not just women, but like men, are the ones who are really sheltered and are not really used to these types of conditions changing. Or like, even the ones that are here that are more middle class and have never had to deal with it, if they're more adaptable and willing to adapt to it, then they don't complain as much, and they get along with what they need, and they'll figure it out also if they didn't ask me. But most of them usually ask, because they know that I'm a resource for them. So I do think that the adaptability part is a really, really important aspect of succeeding in the field, regardless of if it's menstruation or some other health issue that you have. I think right now, you know, aside from like the training that you need prior to going to the field, like in terms of the CPR and first aid, you probably should also just have somebody tell you, we're going into this situation and these are the things you'll be exposed to. Either your collaborator from overseas can have like maybe a little lab meeting where they tell you like, here's the places that we're going to go and this is what it's going to look like. And if you don't know, because sometimes you're trying to figure out what sites you're going to, then at least they can tell you these are the types of situations that we will be under that you should be prepared for. And just having a conversation beforehand, just so you know, okay, if we are going into a mangrove, or okay, we're going into a village where I'll have access to fresh water. And so, you know how long you're in those places, you can plan and bring the right amount of stuff, because you can't bring like all the tampons or like everything anyway, right? So you want to know exactly how much you need. You want to pack light. And so you want to be exact in what you're going to deal with. And you want to be exact in being able to, you know, just make sure you're safe and other people are safe and that everybody has the resources that they need. So I always carry extra stuff with me. Like I have a couple of like extra tampons. I have a couple of extra like panty liners. I have a couple of extra like smaller drinking water bottles. I have a couple of extra headlamps. I have like a couple of extra things as I know I'm in charge and the safety of everybody in the team is my responsibility. And so I always bring extra stuff because inevitably someone's gonna forget something, someone's gonna break, or you bring on somebody to work with you who is from the local community that needs that in order to participate. And so you should be bringing some of that extra stuff anyway. And just knowing that if you are in charge, you cannot absolve yourself of this responsibility by saying that, well, my graduate student is an adult and they'll figure it out, because they sometimes have not experienced this before. And even if you are new to the site, at least you might have more experience with going out to these places and can plan that. And if you don't have experience as a PI going out to those sites, it's your first time, then you should talk to your collaborator so that you figure out what you need to be doing to protect your students and to protect your team also. So these are all just like, be prepared.
Super. That's amazing, that leadership of knowing like that, you know, the buck stops here, that's
Mm-hmm.
your responsibility is just a wonderful approach. And also what we've heard from people coming to Fieldwork Initiative is like, for example, they might be shamed because they asked to take a break on a geographic, you know, expedition and they're tired, or they might be shamed for asking for the day for menstruation or something. And so knowing that in general, this sort of awareness that people need what they need, and that's sort of a private, but also it's an open door policy where we can talk about it. It's sort of a balance. We know not all women menstruate, not all people who identify as, you know, it's very plural, and not, you know, we need to sort of allow people that space to do what they need when they need to, but also the open door, and really push back against this. It can be so soul shattering as a grad student. You forget a headlamp and then your PI yells at you and says you're an idiot and you ruin the whole expedition. And that really can be a huge humiliation. And so that insight that things happen, problems happen, this is learning, and that it's okay. I really applaud that approach of as a leader, because it's a rare thing and it's an important thing, and it can just being kind and being open can really make research such a more equitable space. Because these conversations haven't quite been had, and there's a culture, hasn't there? I mean, I imagine you're quite resilient, but there is a culture about going out into the jungle, and it's very masculine. Have you kind of experienced that? You're changing that in the way you lead your teams, but that's something that's been well known, of this sort of expedition adventure culture. And if you're not willing to like risk your life, then you can't be in research or something.
Right. So I think that machismo is still very true, especially because I work in systematics, right? So most people in systematics are male. And I'm very fortunate I work with that people, because there's actually a lot more women compared to some of these other fields, usually because they were starting in some other field and then they got into some disagreement with their advisors back in the day, and now they work on bats because nobody was working on bats. So like it was like a safe haven also in some ways. So oddly enough, bats have a lot of women compared to some of these other fields. And I think that helps us see that our leadership is willing to at least listen to some of the issues. And so reflecting upon that and how I act is really important, but also improving on it and actually encompassing a lot of these other issues that other people might not have thought about previously. there clearly is still a very like, oh, we do a lot of stuff just because we have to, because it's the field. And like, obviously that's why I have a bunch of weird stories about being in the field. But at the same time, like nobody's like, you know, life and death is going to be risked in a lot of these situations. It's like, we're very careful. And it's only in situations where you could not have predicted that would have even happened that you have to act, where it would be like a life or death kind of situation. So I think that there have been a lot of times where I've had like near death experiences where even if you were a man, you would not have been able to predict it and avoid it unless you did exactly the same thing I did. So it has nothing to do with gender. I think a really good example of this was once that we were supposed to take a ferry to go to this island. And it's a major island and you can only get to it by going from this port. And so we were like, okay, we're gonna go tomorrow because today we're gonna go to the office and meet with the people who do the permitting here just to like make nice with them so that when we leave, we can leave faster. And so we decided to delay going a day. And then the next morning we opened the newspaper and it says that that ferry sank and everybody on it died, like a total loss. And it's like the Pacific Ocean. So there's like nothing, they have no salvage or anything like that. Those boats don't have enough life jackets, you know, and all of those things where you're just like, oh, we were almost on that boat and we just decided not to be. So it's like, and it's like, it doesn't matter if you're a man or woman in that situation. So like in those cases for me, that has been what happens. And so it doesn't matter, no matter how macho you are, it's not going to save you. So I try to reduce the pressures otherwise for things that are part of this very like machoismo culture. And I don't ever think that I've had to deal with it directly from other scientists, but like culturally, sometimes people do mistaken that I am like physically weaker than my male counterpart. And they might be like, oh, she's like willing to actually carry her own equipment and stuff, even though she's a girl. And they'll say like a girl and not like a woman. So like, it's a very specific use of a word. And there are different words that you can use that mean like a young lady, which would have been more appropriate. But they thought like because they thought I was like a student and that I was a woman, that I was not as capable as the male who was on my field team with me at the time. And when I started doing field work, the teams were I was the only woman, and there's 6 dudes or 7 dudes, and the only other woman I would see is somebody who was either cooking for the camp or it was the lady of the house in places that we were staying at. And in the Philippines, I was very lucky because my counterpart there is a woman, and she's like an older woman also. So she's done a lot of field work, and she's done field work for like 20 something, 30 years almost, right? And with some of the best people in our field. So she has had a lot of experience being out there. And so she knows everything that could be known about being in a situation where, you know, she's getting older. She wants like slightly more comfort sometimes. So she knows the tricks also. So she helps out a lot with that. And so she was able to help guide me through like how I would survive in the Philippines is actually very different from how I would survive in Indonesia. And so like, these are the things that you can do. Like if you wanted hot water in the middle of a mountain that has no fresh water, you could pay a guy 20 pesos, which is like 50 US cents. And he'll run down the mountain and bring fresh water from the village and then run back up. And they used to do that like every night because they were sweating so badly, but it was so cold on the mountain at night. And they're doing arboreal trapping for nocturnal animals. So like, you want to wash yourself or you're going to freeze to death when you go to sleep. And so she would just pay a guy to go get hot water. And she told me that she doesn't know if when my advisor went with the entomology team to go do stuff on a mountain, if he knew that you could just pay somebody to bring the hot water up, because he had brought this, it's one of those like field packs where you fill the water and you put it in the sun and it heats the water up so you can take a shower. And so he was bringing that, and he was spending the time to like hang it somewhere and wait for it to heat up. And she was like, wait, did he not know that you could just pay a guy to bring you the hot water and it would be much faster than him leaving in the sun when there's no sun out? Because it's raining all the time. So like, well, how are you going to take a hot shower then? So he didn't know. And I think eventually somebody might have told him, but I'm not sure actually. So we knew because she told me. So I was actually probably more informed than him at one point. And it was quite funny because she told me that she learned that from her male counterpart who trained her. So he's a much older man who was a curator at the Field Museum. And so he had done this before and she kind of picked up the habit from him. So it's like, it's really going down to people who are like, oh, you just learned it because you know that it's acceptable to say that you want that and it's fine. You know, so I think that kind of stuff is transmitted. It's not only a gender issue. Sometimes some people just feel more comfortable having one over the other. And I think for us, if we're dealing with people who are in the field, sometimes like there's religious reasons why men and women might be separated also that you have to be respectful of. There have been several occasions where we would get to a house and everybody usually sleeps in the living room if we're just crashing at somebody's house, but they will insist that they will empty one of the rooms from like their kids or their grandmother or something, and they will say, I should stay in there as a woman. Like I should be completely separate from everybody else. It didn't matter if I was just going to sleep in a different recess in the living room separate from everybody. They're like, no, you should just get your own room. And so they would give me my own room. And I think 50% of the time those rooms also had their own bathroom. So it was like attached as a smaller water closet versus the house's bathroom. And so I had my own bathroom to myself and my own room with a door, or at least a curtain that covers it for privacy. And my advisor was sleeping out in the living room with 6 other guys, and they're all really smelly, and they all have to use the same bathroom, and there's only one of them, and it's really dark over there because it's outside the house, it's not in the house. And so he actually asked me once in the morning, he's like, can I just use your bathroom because you're like not here anyway because you guys are out checking the nets. And I was like, I don't care. And so he actually did have to do that on a couple of occasions because they were just waiting so long for each other to take showers. It was just a problem because of that. So I do think there are those cultural things that do happen where I actually get a slight advantage because I do have that space to myself. And also just as women, sometimes when we go to some places in the Philippines or even in Indonesia, there are these larger bedrolls and stuff. And if I'm in the field with 2 other women or like another woman and somebody else who is like the lady of the house who we don't know, it's okay for us to kind of share that space with them. Versus like if I were a man, I couldn't. And we know that those women have separate rooms and so they can actually house us. Versus like some of the guys have to stay at a different hotel because they didn't have enough space in this person's house and they didn't have a guy who wasn't, with his family that they could stay in. And there was not enough space in the living room and stuff like that. So we've found that for us, sometimes for the hospitality stuff, it was a little bit easier being a woman, but it was entrenched in some gendered issues between the cultures. So yeah, it's a really complicated issue because you want to be very careful and very much like respectful of people's boundaries. Because also in some cases, like women are not allowed to touch men. Like for some of the folks that we met in these really, really remote places that are Muslim, like I am not supposed to like shake hands with them or touch them or anything, right? So when we're saying bye or we're saying hi to them, we're so used to like shaking hands for people. In Indonesia, when you shake your hand, you put, for like great gratitude, you put your hands together and then you put your head like this to them. And so like sometimes we want to really express that we're very grateful. We stayed at their place for like 2 weeks and they were okay with it and they cooked for us every day and everything. But if there was a man who was very conservative, like I'm not allowed to touch him. And so we have to kind of politely do the air handshake recognition kind of thing, just to show that like, we recognize that we do appreciate and are grateful, but we're not allowed to touch each other. And so usually my counterpart will tell me if that's the case, or I would have picked it up from staying with these people for a while. So it's just like being aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to note that we're wanting to talk about nuance.
Yep.
Yeah, like boundaries, discrimination
Yep.
practices, what are limits within academia where we're not trained or we don't get the special
Yep.
support that we need, and this awareness. But there's so much
Yep.
nuance. We don't want it to be like, oh, women this and men this, and not at all. I mean, we have this whole gender spectrum,
Yep.
so we want to do away with that even in general. We're looking at the nuance and the ways in which these conversations
Yep.
need to be had about nuance. And there's so many different situations like you've put in front of us that are complex, and
Yes.
it's not a
Yep.
simple thing. And it's important to be aware ahead of time that these, I think also this is kind of what you've encouraged us to do, is to really research in a timely manner with a good amount of time and preparation
Yes.
takes, in your work, I think preparation is very
Yes.
important because once you're there, there's no
There's no
going back and you
yeah.
can't get this access. Being aware of what hygiene, menstrual products there might be, or hygienic products, being in the country that you're going, what access to medicines, what are issues, what are just the whole 9 yards. And flexibility
Yep.
too. I mean, it's everything all together, which is really important. That's kind of what fieldwork is. Yeah, it's no one set thing. It's wonderful, but it's also crazy, and it can be also really demoralizing. I mean, it's very plural.
Yeah, and there's also just really different expectations sometimes from you if you're like a foreigner. So I remember the first year I met one of my field assistants. He said to me, oh, I just thought you would smoke also because all the foreign women I've met also smoke. And I asked him, I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. Who did you previously work with? And he listed a bunch of people. And I was like, oh, they're all like British or European. And like in the US, there are a lot of people that don't smoke because of different PSA campaigns that have been dealing with that. But also like women that most women don't really smoke that much in comparison to like European women. So they actually expected that I smoke because of the fact that I was foreign. And I had to like explain to them this whole history of like anti-tobacco and smoking stuff that happened in the US like 20 years prior to me. And so they were like, oh, we didn't know that that was a difference. And they thought about it and they were like, oh, that's true. Like I met so-and-so American woman and they also don't smoke. And they just didn't remember because in those cases, those women were not in charge of their teams. And so they sat inside when the men were outside on the porch smoking and discussing like information about where we were going. And because I was the co-leader with my counterpart, we both were sitting on the porch talking to these guys. And because I don't smoke, I was just drinking tea. And it was fine. We didn't make a big deal out of it. But like at the same time, I know that in the beginning, the older guys were like, oh, is she joining us? And then my counterpart said yes. And they were okay with it because I'm a foreigner. Because like they get extra weirded out only if you're like a woman. And so the women in the house, like even the wife of the elder who was giving us information, she was sitting right inside the living room, right behind the door that goes to the porch. And she was just leaning against it the whole time and she didn't come outside, even though she was like whispering stuff to her husband, didn't tell us. So there are a lot of those cultural barriers that exist that you'll see. And some of those things you can't fix because it has nothing to do with you. And,
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to, make live this
yeah,
colonial idea that we go there and
yeah,
we make things mirror us,
yeah.
or whatever our particulars are and what we're comfortable with. Ironically, I actually started smoking in the field because of something similar. Just because, yeah, and people smoke. I mean,
Yep.
everybody smokes, and they would hand roll the cigarette, and it was very much
Yeah.
like a friendly offering,
Yeah.
and it was kind of an invitation to have a conversation and
Yep.
to go one step into depth and more with them and getting to know you. It was a symbol. And if
Yeah.
you said, "Oh no," then it cut that off. Like that
Yeah.
was a rejection. And they also thought maybe because they rolled it and they licked it, maybe you thought
Oh
that
yeah,
they
yeah,
were
yeah,
dirt,
yeah.
which not at
Mm-hmm.
all. So I was like, okay, sure. And then suddenly after a few months here, I was smoking and rolling on my own. I've now quit, obviously, but because of
I've
cultural
actually,
nuances.
yeah, I've heard a lot of people actually pick up smoking only in the field, like as men especially, because they're expected to in some cases. I think I was excused because like women don't really smoke also in Indonesia, so like they're okay with the fact that I didn't smoke. But it was definitely like a social conversation starter that we used to get information a lot of times that we did not know about for these really remote sites. Like we would get stuck on a road where you're just waiting an hour with nothing to do. And so my counterpart would like hop out of the car and like take out his cigarette and pretend like he needs a light and find somebody else who's smoking and just start talking to them. And, it looks like a guy who has a truck, has been driving around everywhere, so he probably knows a bunch of stuff. So we'll just chat him up and then we get a lot of information that helps. And it's definitely a social thing for once you're in a village and you're just hanging out with people. If you're dealing with even some younger folks and you're like indoors instead of on a porch, they will often ask if you're okay with them smoking because they know that there are some people who are not comfortable with it, especially if they're in an enclosed space indoors. So they will, ask for permission. And you don't really see that from the older generation all the time. So it varies in terms of the age group also that you're dealing with and the particular space you're occupying.
Mhm. Yeah, true. And even in some contexts, women smoking cigarettes is thought of as very risque. I mean, even in Spanish, I
Yeah.
don't know why, but in Spanish we used to say like mujeres que fuman puros, like women who smoke cigars, and it meant like, you know what that means?
Oh,
She's a kind of working the streets or something. Like it was this
yeah.
idea. So it can go the other way too.
Yeah.
It's very important to know these nuances, but normally, I mean, I think it sounds like in both of our contexts, it's a very social thing, and there is a gendered kind of,
Yes.
and you might end up smoking just to get
Yeah.
good data or whatnot. But it's
Yeah.
very important to note. Any final thoughts in general about maybe how we change conversations about menstruation? Because you noted before when we've talked before, you said that there wasn't really a lot out there about it, and like maybe changing conversations about it, or the freedom that students might have to ask about it or talk about it. I know sometimes, like you've even stated, if you have a sort of a thin-lipped, PI maybe who's not comfortable having these conversations, it might leave them in a precarious situation. Or
Yeah.
what in general do you feel like needs to sort of let these things be more readily discussed, or in general, just final thoughts that you have?
So I think that has to deal with the larger conversation about normalizing women's health and just, recognizing that women's needs for some things are very particularly different from men and that the current environment doesn't always cater to women, right? So we need to actually be okay with talking about it as the first problem before we can actually get other resources out there to solve it. Like the fact that most men are uncomfortable with it and the fact that I even see like grants that fund projects that basically help normalize menstruation and discussion about menstruation so that people aren't like freaked out by talking about it. That is that's to me very surprising. That's still not improved at all, even though we've been talking about like gender a lot in the last few years. Like nobody really seems to be talking about menstruation as much, and yet it's an issue that has existed for a very, very long time. So that is the first step. We need to normalize conversations about menstruation. I think that at the very least, if you had more women in science, then they would know what to do. And so younger folks could have somebody to ask. And so getting more women into positions of leadership would help a lot with then also normalizing that conversation because you have somebody to go to, and that might increase the number of resources that you have access to in order to get what you need. And then, thirdly, is just generally speaking, I don't think that field health is often treated as seriously as it should be. And we are now starting to have this conversation about that machismo culture that exists and are starting to get rid of that as more women are moving into science, as people are more aware of safety issues. And I don't think that old way of thinking is going to hang out for very long. Because I think also a lot of some of those ways of thinking had to do with people hunting animals as part of how we used to collect specimens and guns and stuff. And a lot of that is disappearing from how we work with animals, right? Because we try to catch them in humane manners where we use other things that are non-invasive. We release animals a lot. And so it's very different in terms of what you're trying to bring back now from the field also. And that might change how and who is actually going to the field. So yeah, I think
the
it's
ideologies vis-a-vis nature are shifted sort of back to a more respectful approach and less kind of.
So I definitely think that that's helping change that, and we're not quite at the point where it's equivalent between the genders yet, but at the same time we're getting there. And so at least that I think people can have a conversation with right now, and it doesn't seem unusual, whereas women's health specifically still is unusual to people. And so we do need to work on normalizing that. I know there was somebody who made a video game or something where I think it had something to do with menstruation, or a pad or something, and they got banned, or people were writing negatively about them. And so it's clearly not normalized. And that was only a few years ago. So
we still have in the US a breastfeeding debate, things like this. So this is part of a larger cultural issue. Also a problem of academia. Also, again, menstruation isn't necessarily just a woman's problem. We've got all form, there's all kinds of things that, individuals who might identify as transgender might menstruate. They might not all women might menstruate. There's so much plurality and lack of, people are freaked out by talking about vaginas and whatever else. And so it's I agree. I do think it's reflective of larger cultural problems that need to get addressed, right? Comfort with these things. And so your assessment is that there's movement towards this. That's a good sort of
I think so, especially because we are getting more women in STEM that are staying and also getting into leadership positions, but it is very, very slow because obviously the leadership is still mostly male, and it's mostly still with people who have that kind of older mindset about field work. So I think as we wait in time, we will see that will change. And some of that has been through people who are very actively pushing for it so that it comes sooner rather than later. And so, following on those initiatives is really important to give them support and making sure that once, you're in a position where you can actually affect change, that you're also contributing to that. I think those are all very important things that we can all do to make sure that happens. Because even if you can't get it right now for yourself, you are helping other people down the line, which might include your friends, your students, and everybody else who's doing it can benefit from it. So it's not just your time is done in the field and you don't care about it. You really should think about how many people come after you.
Right, absolutely. Also, please, as advisors, don't wait until it's a problem, because that means that somebody has to bring that problem to your attention, and that can be a very uncomfortable thing for an individual to have to say, I am menstruating and I need XYZ, that can be, it's just
No.
not pleasant. Let be aware ahead of time, that this is an issue. And that even if they do have to bring it up, don't make them feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable about it. Yeah, just be
Yeah.
normal about it. This is something we've heard is that it got to a point where somebody had to finally bring it up because it was never addressed and it was an issue. And then it was like, oh, they
Hmm.
said
Hmm.
it or something. And very childish, which is bizarre. I mean, we're in academics and such and collecting
Yeah, and we're
knowledge, but
we're
yet
in biology
this,
also. Like you would think it's not that weird to talk about that because it's biology. So yeah, it's very
yeah,
strange.
absolutely. It's we had another another field stories chat where it was touched upon actually about um, things where you're in remote field settings and this is sort of this kind of privacy about it, which is fine. I mean, it can be a private thing for that individual, maybe not, but just that sort of open door kind of
Hmm.
policy where you kind of go with what students need, and you know ahead of
Yes.
time what those things would be, and you don't wait for them to ask for what it
Yes.
is specifically. That's a very good, and my understanding and how you kind of lead your group is that this awareness problems are going to happen,
Yeah.
and we're not going to wait until they do and then put it kind of on that individual. We're going to
Yes.
just assume that they will, and we're going to kind of plan as part of it, and that's part of the research, and that's part of the experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
like knowing that problems happen and you can't plan for everything, and doesn't mean that you're a bad
Yeah.
researcher. We actually had an individual, Ingrid Ramon
Hmm.
Parra. She wrote a little bit about menstruation in the
Okay.
field. She has a blog. So yeah, if you have questions and you're not comfortable asking your advisor or
Just
your
email.
PI, you
Yeah. Just
just
contact. Yeah.
reach out, reach out to folks. People have been in those
Hmm.
positions, so it's really good to. Thank you so much for lending your
Yeah. No
knowledge
problem.
to us. These stories, please write a book. By the way, we would love to hear um, these encounters. They're just amazing. And what is in the future? I know you work a lot, do a lot of consultancy. Are you now grounded because of Corona with your own research, or is that where are you at with your own work? When are you back in the field?
So I think the earliest we can get on a plane is maybe 2021, but because we're in the US, I don't think anyone's going to admit us even in early 2021. So I have no idea until I can get vaccinated, probably is the next time I'll be allowed to fly out to some of those places. I am also very careful of the fact that in Indonesia, they've also had the highest death rate in Southeast Asia, which is significantly less than the US, but it's still worrisome because once you get to these really remote islands, it can get endemic on those islands if they're not treated. And I don't want to be the one to bring that to those sites. And on top of that, one of my students has asthma. And so I don't want her to be exposed to that because I couldn't wait like 3 more months to go somewhere. So even when she initially found out that, they had an outbreak and it was officially in Indonesia, like I told her like the next day that you can get a plane ticket, you need to go to somewhere else and I will pay for it if you can't pay for it. So I just paid for all the stuff to fly her around in places when she couldn't. I made sure she stayed there. I checked in on her at least once a couple of weeks, every 2, 3 weeks or something like that, just to give her enough space, but also just to make sure she's okay. And just to make sure nothing has changed where she might be exposed to these negative potential effects of COVID to her. So I haven't been able to do anything in the field because of that. And our community conservation project was mostly led by her in the past year. So I'm comfortable with doing oversight remotely for them now because we've already been doing it like that in the past little while. So I feel that they are prepared to be on their own a little bit more. So I'm okay with them. Unfortunately, my personal research stuff, I had a bunch of projects that were supposed to start this year. Like I was about to finish getting the permit somewhere. I had other people who are collaborators coming in, like a postdoc. All of that is canceled until further notice because you can't get a permit when everybody's office for permits is closed in the Philippines. And so our postdoc actually has delayed their arrival date also so that it can start in a time where it makes more sense for them to, and that way their fellowship lasts longer once they can actually start to do the research when everything is reopened. I have spent a lot of my time mostly for situations where we could do workshops and do training for people remotely, and like I can be here physically and just oversee them through like Zoom. We also set up contingencies for recording and oversight by having I have an assistant in Indonesia, and then we also take the whole video and then transcribe it and translate it into English and then subtitle it so we can hand it back to the main office also just as like the raw data to go with my report. Like there's a lot of stuff that we've been doing that takes like extra effort just to make sure everything is accounted for in a way that would not have been a problem if I could physically have been there. And because of that, I often stay up at really weird hours just to, talk to people that we're partners with.
Do things like this. Do the same. We're on the other side of the globe from each other now. I have one final question, just because I know about mangrove forests. Sounds like you work a lot, and we know they're depleting. And it sounds like, especially for folks who work in conservation, they have to have right in front of them, as kind of their daily bread and butter, the things that other people don't want to look at. And it can be very taxing existentially, knowing like the damage that we're doing on a global scale, knowing, what you have to think about. It's not something you have the privilege of shying away from. And that can be very hard too, that aspect of research, of actually seeing, okay, this is a depleted forest. This is deforestation right in front of me. It's not somewhere far away. And that's kind of an added, of course, also precariousness, like right now, projects canceled. But that's an important conversation to have too now, I think, about folks who work with stuff that, global warming or very serious issues of our planet are right in front of them. That's takes a toll. So I hope you're practicing self-care, or this is it. You're like, well, what can we do? It's 2020.
I have my ways of taking a break, so I'm okay with that. Like some of the stuff that I used to do for a break, like rock climbing, I obviously can't do right now, even though the gyms are reopened, because I don't want to risk my personal health by touching things that other people have touched. So I have stopped anything that will require me to go outside and just make sure that I'm okay with being indoors. But because I am a field biologist, I'm actually used to being isolated a lot and used to being kind of solo. It's more the fact that I can't be outside in nature that is the problem, unless the like being cooped up inside alone. Because I do feel like I have a lot of friends who are overseas, and so I'm used to often having to communicate with them through the internet only anyway. My family, it was living in Hong Kong for most of my life also, so like you have to talk to them over the internet only. So for me, that's not really an issue, but I am starting to get to the point where I'm like, I wish I could be outside physically in nature. And fortunately, I live in a place in Maryland that is near a very large park. And so I could take a walk in the park at least if I wanted to. It's just not the same because I'm used to dealing with this like, beautiful, pristine water and like mangroves and all these other situations where people are like, oh, you look like you're on vacation and not working. It's like, yeah, my field sites are really lovely to look at. And this is very different, but it'll have to do for now. So I do feel like there is that level of missing nature like immensely right now. And a lot of my hobbies that are indoors at least can be satiated for the moment. And I found that having some of my friends who do like Twitch streams, we have a Discord open so we can all just like yell at each other while we're working, or like a bunch of them are playing a video game and they're all yelling at each other and I'm just like doing work and listening to them.
Staying connected however way possible. That's great. Well, I think it's just kind of what you stated, that no research project is worth risking somebody's health and wellness. It can wait 3 months. This is so important that there's really nothing worth, no data or anything worth trauma or risking somebody else's health or wellness or their life. That's really, really an important note. So wish this has been something that has gone along with that culture of like risk taking and risk it all and be Indiana Jones and such, which we really want to change. So thank you so much for all of your insights, for all of your experiences, and for talking so candidly about these issues. We really, really appreciate hearing everything, and we appreciate you. Thank you for your leadership style and everything that you do, and for what you do for the flying foxes and all other creatures. This is just, we thank you. So I want to just hand it over to you. Any last thoughts? I want to be mindful of your time too. So any final takeaways about anything in general?
I just want people to know that bats are actually your friends. And even though they are the natural reservoir hosts, that means that we should be studying them in order to find out how we can also, overcome this pandemic instead of being fearful of them or trying to kill them. Because usually when people take actions like that, the opposite result happens and you'll get more pathogenic transmission. So like your bats and tell other people to like bats, because they're also very important for things like tequila, which they pollinate, or, controlling the amount of insects that are in your backyard. So, please, please, please be a friend to bats. And thank you for having me.
Oh, I love a good bat plug. That was wonderful. Great. Yes. Bats are very vital part of the ecosystem. I'm actually in Transylvania right now, so
Ooh.
I've got some bats just right outside my door, which are wonderful, and they do great good for the ecosystem. And
Mm-hmm.
they deserve to live, and it's not their
Mm-hmm.
fault that we are ruining all kinds of things. And they're given a bad rap like many other creatures are, so that's very, very
Mm-hmm.
important. So thank you very much. And for everybody listening, we hope this is all I think this is definitely very important information. You can reach out at any time to connect. We want to remember to plan ahead of time for field work, and if anyone is
Mm-hmm.
making you feel uncomfortable, or if you have issues of menstruation or anything at all, and you don't want to be the one to raise it, you reach out to us and we make sure to have those
Mm-hmm.
conversations and give you that information. So don't feel uncomfortable to come forward and connect with us, both or anyone. There's a lot written out there as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Tsang, and everyone else. Have a wonderful evening. We're going to connect again on episode 11. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.